welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with marketplace founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 35, and I'm super excited to welcome on Anand Iyer, who's previously the founder and CEO of Trusted, a marketplace for childcare that was acquired by Care.com. So prior to Trusted, Anand was a co-founder of Threadflip, which is a marketplace for women's apparel. So he has quite the experience with building and scaling marketplaces. I do also want to mention that I've been following Anand for a few years now and reading some of his incredibly insightful posts on marketplaces. So I'm super excited to welcome him on today and dive into marketplaces. So Anand, welcome to the group chat. And we have quite a bit to chat about, but let's maybe start off by you sharing more on your background for those that don't know you and how you got into marketplaces.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in. So on my background, thanks for the lovely introduction. Most recently, I was the CEO and founder of Trusted. For the last 9 or 10 months, I've been at home with our daughter, and just kind of seeing this process through during COVID. But I'd say that that's where my experience is. I've been really challenged my experience as a parent. But prior to that, obviously we did Trusted for a good amount of time. Trusted started off as like a core need my wife and I had once we had our daughter. We just didn't feel like we had we could rely on a marketplace to find quality childcare for our daughter, and that's sort of how the company came about. Actually, in full transparency, it was the very first sort of avatar of the product was a date night app for married couples. So we wanted to figure out a way to get married couples out of the house more. And as we started to iterate on this product, we quickly realized that couples were like, hey, we've got open table, we know how to get to our concerts, we need childcare. And so we pivoted within a couple of months of starting this thing. And by we, it's my co-founder Vivian and I, and we're like, this is actually where the core need lies, and that's kind of how Trusted was born. And of course, the key word, the word, we created like word bubble of what users were saying, and trust kind of came up over and over again, not just from parents, but also from caregivers. But we launched it, we scaled it across a few different markets. We found product market fit, especially with sort of our B2B2C offering, which is selling Trusted as a corporate benefit, and that became really popular and made our company very lucrative and attractive to the incumbents in the space, like Bright Horizons and Care.com. And the rest is history. We got acquired by Care in 2018, and but prior to that, as Mike was saying, I did another marketplace called Threadflip, which is a sort of a peer-to-peer marketplace for women's apparel, specifically targeting the eBay fashion vertical. And there's been some phenomenal wins in that space of late. Unfortunately, Threadflip didn't make it. We shut it down. My background, I'm an engineer. I have my degree from Purdue, but that was eons ago now, and I'm an old man. But that's a quick but long background on me.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing more with us. So I have to ask, in the early days of Trusted, did you initially have the domain, or how did you secure that? Because that was definitely a good one.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about that before we had this conversation, and it is one of those weird marketplaces where we actually had more demand than we had supply. So we were always supply constrained. It was something we always sort of chased. So how do we build demand? I think one of the things that we did, we obviously launched in sort of our backyard. We launched in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we have between Viv and I, we had a pretty huge network there. One of the things I always advise marketplace founders to do is to think about sort of go-to-market strategy, right? How do you get your first 10 customers? How do you get your first 50? How do you get your first 100? And Viv and I were really concerted about how we went to market with that. And from the earliest days in our pitch deck, we had this who are our first 10 customers? We were very, very serious about who these people were going to be. And, we didn't grow beyond that sort of vertical before we felt like we could go on to the next one. And so there was a different tactic for each one, right? For the first 100, it was purely word of mouth. For the first, the 100 to 1,000, we started relying on these parent groups. And then I'd say that, now to answer your question, when you started at scale, I'd say over 65% of our demand used to come from next door, when parents were asking other parents hey, I need a sitter, I need a nanny, where do I go? And then other parents would jump in and say, hey, I used Trusted, it was a great experience. And what we found was different about that sort of word of mouth was, I'm very likely to recommend a service to you I may not give up my valuable asset. I may not give up Jessica, who's like this amazing sitter that I have, because I don't want her time to get taken away by another family. But I'm willing to recommend the service to you. And that's very analogous to what we've heard from One Medical, for example, for those of you who are familiar with One Medical, which is like, I may not, I rely on the company because I feel like they've got my back. The practitioner, I may not be willing to share their name with you because I want them for myself. So demand was high out of the gate, and we really invested our acquisition dollars on the supply side.
Got it. Thanks for sharing more on that. So I was actually asking about the domain, but yeah, demand was actually my next question.
Domain.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misheard you.
Oh no, you're all good. That was a much better conversation. So.
I can answer the domain as well. We never secured trusted.com, so it was all usetrusted.com. But I think if you visit trusted.com, I think it's a site for verifying authenticity of like high-end jewelry or something like that. Yeah. I think it still might be the case. I don't know. I think we got a C&D from them very early on, and we're like, we're not shutting a company down because you think you have a trademark on this name.
Got it. So kind of with trust is in like not only the name, but when someone's looking to find someone for childcare, I can imagine that might not the first thing might not be going online and kind of trusting someone else. So early on, kind of when you were really focused, as you mentioned early on in this specific kind of segment, how did you build trust with your users in the community?
Yeah, it was a hurdle, right? And that's why it was sort of instilled in our name, and we felt like we needed to embrace this right out of the gate. And by the way, this existed for both sides of the marketplace, right? In fact, between my co-founder and I, we had this good split where she represented the supply side, and I, as a parent, represented the demand side. And tangentially, this concern came up very much the supply side as well. How do I just walk into a household? Because I don't even know where I'm going. How can I trust that this family is not going to take advantage of me in some way? And how do I make sure I get paid at the end of the day? So the concerns existed on both sides, and so we felt like we needed to embrace the name right out of the gate. So that was the first thing we did. On the demand side, there was no single silver bullet. Like every iteration of the product, we needed to focus more and more on ensuring that we were giving you the information you needed to make the decision you needed to make for everything from social proof, right? Like as someone else I know worked with this caregiver, like that gives me social proof. Another variant of social proof is that my employer has sanctioned this benefit, so that's social proof, right? And if I know that my employer is giving me the benefit, I know invariably I feel good about it. And of course, there's so many other little things. I mean, of course, all of this table stakes now, but ratings and reviews, right? Knowing that, that I'm not the first person to jump in and hire this caregiver. So we had that cold start issue, because if you have 0 reviews, then how do I trust them? So then we introduced references, right? So if a caregiver came in and has worked off platform somewhere, we would ingest those references. And so we would be able to solve the cold start issue by giving you the information you need to make that decision. There's so many things like that. And I won't say there's any one single silver bullet, but we spent a lot of time in analyzing like what the user behavior was with like first 50 users. And one thing we learned, I'd say again, is that we're very analogous to like in terms of product experience, like Airbnb, right? So you input your parameters when you need care, and then we present a list of caregivers to you. One simple learning we had early on was that we needed to show as many faces in that first screen as there was as much there was room in the screen in and of itself, right? So, I think that number was like 5. We needed to show you 5 faces before a user would actually tap on and see a full profile. And so like if we didn't show you at least 5 faces, like let's say we didn't have enough supply and the number was 2 or 3, the user was like, I don't feel good enough about actually even tapping on a caregiver's profile to go and look at her full at a full profile information. So that was like the first hurdle in this like funnel. So there's so many different things like that. And once you get a profile page, we had videos, right? Video testimonials were huge. I remember the earliest, one of the first things that we had these videos recorded. And I remember my daughter coming over when she was like 2 or 3, and she'd look at the video and she'd get like, somewhat that created validation. And we heard from so many users who do that, like, by the way, here's a person who's going to watch you tonight. And that became, that became a whole thing. And of course, and then there's the last thing I'll say is that there were certifications, right? So like, do you have a CPR certification? Do you have a first aid certification? Do you speak another language? And like, as we started to ingest this information and we automatically created these badges for you, that added more validation as well. So I think it started at the very top with like a brand name, and then it bubbled down to like these minutiae as things went on. And similarly, by the way, on the supply side as well, there's a lot we needed to do to make sure that our caregivers felt comfortable moving in. So, again, very hidden to our consumers, but our parents, but caregivers would also be able to leave reviews for the parents. And so caregivers would be able to see and go, okay, this parent, this is what I need to know. Or there'd be notes, like for example, they do have a dog, the dog does bark, but the dog's very friendly. Or, I think there's so many such notes like that made it crucial for the supplier to be able to engage and make sure that they felt invested in the platform to grow.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for sharing more on that. And then can you just give us some like maybe a context on the timeline on that? So was that like 2017 or so, around that point?
When we launched the company, it was early 2015. And yeah, and then, as time went on, I think that acquisition closed in like mid 2018.
Got it. And then what was your monetization model as a marketplace?
Yeah, so we had we added a service fee on top of each caregiver's rate. So caregiver's rate would vary, right? So they would have, they would charge, well, we would set the pricing for them. So it was anywhere from 15 to up to about $45 an hour, depending on the caregiver's competencies. And then we took a 25%, we charged a 25% fee on top of that.
Got it. So you were, so I guess like based off of like feedback or accreditation or some kind of reference points, you were setting the prices on behalf of the supply?
That's right. Yeah.
Was that from the beginning, or did you kind of evolve into that?
We set their rates right out of the gate. I remember Viv and I had some very serious conversations about this. The main reason there's sort of two, in sort of a mental model of pricing, there were two things that went into play. The first was, there's no Kelly Blue Book equivalent for a caregiver, right? Like, how do you assess what a caregiver's rate should be? Like, that is such a difficult question to ask. And this person is invariably watching some of your most valuable assets, right? They're watching your children. How do you put a price tag on that? And the one thing we learned across the board was that 90% of caregivers underprice themselves. And how do we know they underprice themselves? Because we knew what the aptitude was for parents to pay, and we knew where caregivers came in, and there was a mismatch there. So we had this data, and we collected this data, and of course, it being on the demand side, very qualitatively myself, and with the parents we surveyed, we're like, okay, this is sort of what your sweet spot is, and this is what caregivers are going to charge. There's like a $2 to $3 discrepancy here, and we knew that we could bridge that gap. So number one, so we felt like we needed to put that pricing model in. And second, we had, I'd say sort of a side note to that, like 1A, is that we had a dynamic pricing model, right? So for example, we could say that on certain days, like for example, Martin Luther King Day, it's a holiday. Some companies still don't offer that as a holiday, but all schools are closed, right? So demand was really high on those days. Supply was good, but not really healthy. So we'd be able to ebb and flow the rates based on things like that. And so a caregiver wouldn't be able to set her own rates, but we'd be able to get her the best rate possible. And that was a real cause for stickiness and retention on the platform. So that's, to answer your question, yeah, out of the gate, we control pricing. We added variables in there to be able to get them more money, but never below their floor.
Got it. And then you did kind of mention earlier in the beginning of this, I believe you were saying that it's you had a business side for when it comes to the demand. Or was
sorry, a business side.
So your demand on the demand side of the marketplace, what was that? Was that like I'm an individual parent, or did you kind of tap into the demand with businesses, or could you maybe?
I see. Yeah. So our initial go-to-market was exclusively sort of direct to consumer, right? So it was all parents, and we focused heavily on that. Like that was our market thesis. And we never, and as the company grew, we realized that we didn't really have to sell to them. The value prop was really high. The word of mouth was really strong. We ran test campaigns in like very small budgets. But we really never needed to create demand. Demand was actually extremely healthy. It was supply that we really needed to focus on. But where this was completely organic, and I think it was like in year 2 or 3 when we really started the flywheel was happening. We're launching in different markets. When one user from a company called Segment, which is now a very big and popular company, reached out and said, "Hey, I've been using this. I've been using this very well. I love the product, and I'd love to be able to have other users of segment.com use this product as well. Like, can we make this a benefit? We're a small company. We're like 100 people." And I was like, sure. And so like I went in and spoke to like the head of benefits there, right, the head of HR. And that kind of started the process. Then that clicked for us. Like, okay, wait a second. And the price point was, and two things. The incumbent models actually charged a lot of money, which made these smaller businesses, it made it sort of, it wasn't tenable for them to pay the price that a Microsoft or a Salesforce would pay to provide this kind of benefit. So they were like, okay, we can work with Trusted. Your rates are much more reasonable, right? So we're creating this sort of like, I wouldn't say arbitrage, but we created a model that made it more tenable for, small businesses and budding startups to be able to use our pricing. So while initial go-to-market is always direct to consumer, they actually created social proof on the platform. When businesses came in and they immediately turned it on for their employees, I could download this app, because my company gave me the benefit. And the next thing I have a beautiful like humming platform that I can use for my childcare needs.
Got it. And then you did kind of mention at the point of, where that kind of like flywheel kind of kicked in, and that's a, term we all use in marketplaces. Could you maybe share a little bit about, at what stage that was at for you as a marketplace, and kind of like what contributed to like when that really kind of got started?
Yeah, there were the biggest change that we noticed was our sort of transparent pricing model, right? So the one, although we always set our caregivers rates, the pricing on the demand side was actually always fixed, right? So a caregiver could make anywhere from $15-$20 an hour, but we always charged our parents. I can't remember. I think it was like 25 an hour. And this was when we launched in the Bay Area, by the way. And we felt like, okay, there's enough cushion there, there's enough margin there for us, but we weren't transparent about the pricing, right? So sometimes the caregiver would walk into a parent's home and she'd go, "I'm making 17 and you're paying 25? Like, what's going on there?" And they, we're like, "Oh, we're a for-profit company. We need to fund our software and services and acquisition costs and blah, blah, blah." But that never clicked. So the changes that we made in making the pricing model really transparent and saying, okay, you pay Jessica 17 an hour, and that, we're going to make that very transparent through our profile page, but we're gonna have her tack on a service fee, and we'll be very transparent about that. That was a big moment for us because that introduced a lot of transparency. Caregivers felt very vested in the platform, and the biggest thing that we noticed is that we had this curve we noticed around this chart that showed us how much availability caregiver had. So again, very analogous. If you're an Airbnb host, how many days of a month do you have your place available for rent? In a very similar model, how many hours does the caregiver put up for availability? We noticed that shot up significantly when we made this pricing change, right? That caregivers felt more vested. They didn't feel like we were taking advantage of them. And again, liquidity being a very key factor in marketplaces, when that number shot up and everything else remaining constant, we felt like more users were taking advantage. Like, oh, wait a second, there's more availability now. I can book caregivers whenever I want. And that made the flywheel really tick. And then the more they got booked, the more money they were making, the more availability they had, the more they refer their friends, and vice versa on the other side as well, right? So like that network effect really kicked in. And then we're like, okay, now we need to take this to LA, which I think was our second market. And then, I'm sorry, New York was the second market, and then LA and Seattle and so on.
Got it. And then did you ever have challenges with disintermediation, or people taking, saying, "Hey, I found someone on your platform," and then kind of taking that offline the, second or third time? Or
yeah, it was always a risk out of the gate, and something we needed to work really hard on. I'd say that the biggest advantage for us there's a couple of ways we'd want to track this. We track this very closely is caregiver retention, right? So like once we brought someone on board, how much would they stay on, right? How many bookings would they continue to have? Because usually that would tell us that they're either invest in the platform and don't want to leave, or if they do leave, then there's some signal for us to track. And early on, it would kind of ebb and flow, and for many reasons, right? So we'd run these surveys and try to find out like what's really, why are you not working as much, and we'd try to tease out whether disintermediation was happening. Now, again, not everyone's is going to be honest about the responses they give back to us, right? And we felt like, and by the way, I may have skimmed over this, but all our caregivers were employees, right? They were W-2 employees, right? So they weren't contractors. So we felt like we had a very good relationship with them. And that was by design. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to create this model so that we could prevent disintermediation. So we could ask them these questions like, you still have full flexibility even as an employee, but why aren't you working more? And so we'd get various answers. Again, coming back to the pricing model, when we felt like we gave them control over and transparency into pricing, not so much control, but the ability to make more money than they would ever be able to make, that was a big turning point for us. So going back to something you said about pricing, a couple more things. If a caregiver starts making 17 an hour, that rate isn't fixed for her. But on many of the other platforms, they would have to sort of price themselves. And there's a sort of race to the bottom, right? Like, can I find the lowest? I won't sacrifice, I won't compromise on a few of the things, but pricing is one of those interesting sort of attributes that I may need to think about. So what we did is we gave these caregivers the ability to make more money as time went on. So you'd start at 17, but if you did 100 bookings and you had, great ratings, then we'd promote you. We'd give you more money in the platform. And then we had multipliers on top of that. So if you work during peak hours or, other things like that, you could make even more money. And so that became the biggest reason to be sticky on the platform, right? So a parent wouldn't know exactly what to offer Jessica because we would always be giving her the best rate, right? So the question again becomes like, I have these individuals who are reaching out to me and we can't control that. But what we try to control in as many words as, as a Mr. as I can apply to that word, we can create a moat around our caregivers, right? So we can say, you can choose to work for a parent, but guaranteed, you work for us, not only will you be able to make the most amount of money, but the more hours you clock on the platform, the better chances you have of making more money on the platform. So if you visit our website now and you go to the specific Bay Area, some of the caregivers were highlighted. They didn't start making 25, 30 an hour. They started off making 15, 16 an hour, but they've been promoted so much that there's extreme demand for them. And that's just the nature. That being said, again, disintermediation is a valid thing to be worried about. The way we try to tackle it through data.
Got it. Yeah, it's thanks for sharing more on that. So it's pretty. I can see it's pretty compelling as far as on the supply side, and retention on that. So could you maybe share a little bit about kind of the acquisition and how that came about?
Yeah, as I was mentioning, we started to hit this. You found the sweet spot with this sort of B2B2C offering, and that became very lucrative for the incumbent players in the space. And Care at Work, for example, is a very fast-growing business within Care.com. Care at Work is the corporate benefits offering that Care.com has. And so I think I got first introduced to the head of product at Care.com through a mutual friend. And the conversation started escalated, and soon we were meeting with key members of Care.com, including the CEO, and we hit it off right out of the gate. We felt like we were a very product software focused team, a small team, and that's done a lot. And they were the big players in the space. And for Viv and I, our aspiration was always to try to get to that scale. It was a core tenet of when we started the company. We want to serve as many people as possible with this product, and that's when we've been successful. And so as we started to see what we could do with Care.com's sort of desire in our software, and where we could hit the kind of scale we could hit by merging with them, this became sort of a no-brainer for us. And I'd say that even Care.com has gone through their own sort of transition over the last year as IAC's acquired Care.com, and IAC has also been very excited about this model because it really eases the burden on the demand side, and it makes the whole, it sort of elevates the marketplace model quite a bit. So we feel like we'd gotten off on the right start at the right time. Again, timing is so key to some of these things that have made the sort of coming together these companies very lucrative.
Great. And then maybe could you share a little bit about what it's like, or what it was like in your case, kind of going through the acquisition as a founder, and as a CEO?
Yeah. I think it was I think it was Ben Horowitz who said in his book, when during critical times he slept like a baby, which is, he woke up every couple of hours crying, right? So I'd say that that was the same for Viv and I, because it is, there's so much that goes in your mind, about like you started this company, you're handing over the reins to others. Although Care.com was great about letting us run our business independently, and it still is, hasn't been the case for quite some time. But there's so many sort of factors that go into the negotiation. I think it was a true test of personality, of your own sort of ability to manage yourself. There's so many things, so many lessons I've learned from this. And I'd say, just having a wonderful support system. My wife was an incredible asset to us in this process. Like, she helped us with so many things, like even small things like negotiating deal terms, because with a background as a lawyer and having seen so many of these deals. So I'd say that I could probably write like a 5-part series on what it was like to go through this. But it was a true test of character for both of us. And I remember listening to this talk from Josh Koppelman from First Round Capital, who's a phenomenal marketplace investor. And he said that some of the best calls he made was when Half.com, which is a company he'd founded, had gotten acquired. And, he made these calls letting the employees know they were gotten acquired. Your hard work is paid off, and here's, there's going to be a wonderful check coming your way. And I think that was very similar to, that was one of the most gratifying experiences that I had when I called up all our investors, all our employees, and said, hey, folks, like, this is happening, and we're moving on to the next chapter of this company. So I'd say that there was a lot of the whole process took about 3 months. There was a lot of diligence required, especially in an industry like ours where it's a labor marketplace. There's a lot of work involved dealing with children, and it can lead to certain sort of litigious situations. And so they needed to do the diligence that there were no skeletons in our closet. And we had a very clean book. There was absolutely no incidents, and so as a result of that, it became an easy process. But we needed to go through, and they needed to do a diligence to make sure that everything was on the books and clean. So that process took a while, but when it did happen, it culminated, and it was very gratifying to make it through this journey. But there was it was a roller coaster for sure in those 3 months, and I'd say that I think I probably aged 3 years in those 3 months, but I've learned so much along the way.
Yeah, thanks for sharing more on that. So and congrats on it, by the way. So yeah, I was definitely planting the seed for maybe a post coming up on the acquisition. So I know you have some really great writings on Medium. So
thank you. Yeah, and I mean, it was we had another acquisition that happened a year and a half after that. So there was I added a whole different scale, taking a public company private again, which was, and living that was a whole other experience as well. So yeah, I think, I can't remember who said this now, but they're like, you should add M&A as a skill that you have in your LinkedIn profile, which is not something I ever aspired to do. But it was definitely, I learned a lot very quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine. So we're about to jump into questions here with the group. So I know we had two posted in here, but maybe before we do, could you share, any kind of I would guess say like tips or kind of insights for early stage marketplace founders, kind of given your background and experience?
How much time do we have? There's a lot. I think one of the biggest things that I come across lately is that, and I have very fortunate that I think and I think you probably see this as well, Mike, which is like we get a lot of people who feel very comfortable reaching out, and I feel very comfortable in having these chats with them about their product, their go-to-market. And where I get hung up a lot is, and this is one, if I could just, of the many things in this sort of like atmosphere of tips that you can provide, if there's one thing I can think about, is just being very true with yourself about what the market size is. And it's very easy to say, like, if I were to back out, let's just use trust as an example, right? I'm quoting numbers from between 2013 and 2015, but we did the math and we're like, oh, there's 28.5 million households with at least one child under the age of 13, I think. And then that became sort of a market size, right? Which is actually very factually true, but our target market is not them, right? For the price points that I'm sharing, they were, not every household thinks about childcare the same way that the very top 10% of average household income in a given area thinks about childcare. Suburbs think very differently about childcare than urban areas do, and there's so many different things like that. So I'd say if there's one thing I could add, it'd be like be very thoughtful about who your users are and then how many of those users exist, because that will really dictate the size of your market. And again, it could be 100 users and 100 companies on one side versus the other, and that's perfectly fine and acceptable. It's just being very conscious about that, because that will dictate how you go to market. If you may acquire one customer a month, you may acquire 100 customers a month, but it's just being very diligent about that. Not every company has 7 billion users who are the target market. Like, that is just not feasible. So that's just one thing I'll share. But then aside from that, there's just, as you know, there's just so many things you can look into when it comes to building a marketplace. So I'll start there.
No, that's a really great point. So, well, cool. So we're going to jump into questions here. So just want to be respectful of time. Hey, Lucas, did you want to jump on?
Sure. Thank you very much. Anand, thank you very much for those insights.
Yeah, of course.
About me, I'm Lucas. I'm from Munich, Germany, and we're trying to launch or evaluating the launch of a platform in a B2B setting. So it couldn't be more different than yours, but then again, it isn't. It is a B2B in the construction space. But again, and as probably many marketplaces are, it's a lot about trust, especially in business relationships. It's a different thing, and here it is about the stability of a project or a house. So my question was that I proposed was, did you find a way to explicitly measure the level of trust between supply and demand? I mean, trust is a very vague concept.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, maybe by the time that you found a metric that you could follow and that you could also use as a KPI, because obviously higher retention, they must trust the supply a bit more. But was there a way that you could like really quantify that trust?
Yeah. And I'd be curious to hear about how your marketplace, like how you're thinking about building it. I'd say, and I'd love to hear more. For us, the biggest sort of one of the biggest numbers we looked at is what we call sort of the search to booking ratio, right? So when you launched the app, you conducted a search. What percentage of those 100 searches result in creating a booking? And that was the biggest thing we tracked. So that was a big metric. But there were so many KPIs that fell under that, and so we created this funnel, right? So you'd conduct a search. How many faces would you see? Of those faces, how many profiles would you click on? When you clicked on a profile, how far down the screen would you go? And then finally, when you hit that book button, and then brings you to the pricing confirmation page, how many people drop off from there? So I'd say every one of those pieces, every one of the steps had a trust component sort of built into it. And then we have like these. They were sort of multivariate tests, right? Because you were presented with sometimes with about 20 different profiles. So what made you pick the profile that was most interesting to you? And it wasn't price. Price wasn't the reason that parents were searching on. They were searching on social proof, like how many reviews does the person have? How many people do I know who's booked the same person? And what is their longevity on the platform? So all these different variables are the ones that we started to track, and we realized that those are the numbers we needed to move, right? So if we can get our caregivers to like this critical mass, and I think it was something like 50 reviews. If they had more than 50 reviews on the platform, parents didn't actually need to care that much. Then it came to some other factors, but that was one of the key things. And so we tried to standardize everything else that we could. So every caregiver, I remember the first 100 caregivers we'd acquire in any market, we needed to ensure that they had their CPR certifications, their first aid, and all these things sort of ingested on the platform. So you don't have to sort of decide based on those vectors, right? Then it would come to like, do I like her video? Then it's qualitative, right? So I'd say that the highest level metric that we could track was the search to fill, so we could ensure trust on that side. And that was how we measured it. And then there were so many different attributes that kind of went under that contributed to that top line metric. And those were largely all controlled via. So there was, again, two things that would control this, right? One is our operations team ensuring that our caregivers were adding enough availability so that search to fill ratio would be plush. The second is our product, right? Like how are we presenting this information so that parents felt like they had the trust they needed to make sure and get to that next level. So, but happy to chat more about sort of what you're building, because like you said, all of these may not apply in a B2B setting.
Right. Thank you very much.
Awesome. That's a great question. Thanks for sharing more on that. So
yeah.
Yeah, and you also had a great post about that on Search to Fill. So I'll share that with the group following. So
yeah, thank you.
Well, Carlos had to jump, but he actually posted a question that he wanted me to ask on his behalf. And that was, how did you fund the kind of initial development of Trusted? And could you share more on the, on your fundraising process too, or journey?
Yeah, I was talking to someone else about this, and I'd say that I was, and I'll be the first one to acknowledge and check this, that, in the sense that I think we came in with quite a bit of privilege into starting this company, and having been and lived and worked in the Bay Area, there was, when we were first floating this idea, before we'd even started, like the first, again, as I mentioned, Trusted, right at the beginning of the conversation, for those of you who weren't there, Trusted was a different product when we first started building it. And there were folks who were interested in funding us, like, hey, it looks like you two are working on something, would love to be an early sort of, supported investor in the company. And we sort of held those to bay because we weren't really sure what was going to come of it. But as soon as we started building, or we'd realized that Trusted was the way to go, we had some folks sort of lean in and say, hey, like, we'd love to, help you sort of get this off the ground. So we didn't really have a product. We did a sort of pre-seed round, and that was sort of the basis for building the initial version of the product. It was a pretty hefty build, right? We needed to build, we actually first built our caregiver side, and then we built our parent side. And so we did a pre-seed round, which quickly after that, we did a seed round, I think maybe less than 3 or 4 months after that. But that was sort of like how we positioned it. And I'd say that it is very fortunate to be in this position that we got this pre-seed round come together, which helped us build a product and get to market very quickly. And we did it, we built a lot of different systems in about 2.5 months, which is really fast. And then once we started to gain more traction in the Bay Area, we raised a seed round.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing about that. So I know there was another question about that too. So we did, and then Caitlin had a question that she posted in here. She unfortunately had to jump too, but she wanted to ask about how you scaled your Nextdoor efforts. So I guess she's used Nextdoor also, and she wanted to know if there was anything in particular you did to encourage that behavior naturally.
Yes. Nextdoor is a hard nut to crack. Like, you can't really scale your efforts within, it's a walled garden, right? Like, for example, I can't see what's happening in Santa Monica, right? Theoretically, right? Like, there's no way, because, the Nextdoor onboarding process, I don't know if it's still the same now, but you needed to verify that you lived in a certain neighborhood before you could, and you've probably only done this once in your life, so you probably don't remember, but unless you've moved, there's no way for you to, tap into what's happening there. So like, our attribution came from when we just see, who our referrer was using our analytics tool. So that's when, they clicked on something from Nextdoor, which is what brought you to the website. That's how the attribution happened. Now, that being said, we couldn't influence what was happening with the Nextdoor communities and how they were talking to each other organically. We never paid for any advertising on there. In fact, I think we checked once, and it wasn't really for the demand supply side, and it was completely untenable for us. Like, their marketing costs were, or their paid acquisition campaigns were just way above what we were willing to pay. So, and our caregivers weren't on Nextdoor, so like that didn't matter. But yeah, we didn't really scale the efforts. We really couldn't, because I had access to my little small neighborhood in San Francisco. Viv did hers, and we would monitor that in our neighborhoods, but that's about all we could do. The rest happened organically. I think these parents, especially these power parents, right, who really felt like they wanted to share, and they wanted to be known as the ones who were armed with this information to help other parents out. And there's such great communities that get built like this. They were the ones who really sort of shared this information. And then I'd say that, in this pie chart, where 65% traffic coming from Nextdoor, roughly, 30% came from Facebook, and our deeper digging and analysis helped us realize that this actually came from Facebook groups, right? So it wasn't just organic on Facebook, but there's a lot of parent groups out there, and I couldn't even tell you what they are. I can tell you, name a few of them in the Bay Area, a couple in New York, but I can't tell you what those look like in other parts of the country. But that was sort of our analysis, and we really couldn't do much to scale those efforts. It was just happening organically.
Yeah, got it. So that I was actually kind of curious about the community aspect of it. Did you either have any kind of community built on your platform, or kind of cultivate communities off platform as a marketplace?
We did for the supply side, because that's, again, one of the areas where we felt like we could add more trust. We felt like there's already so many pockets of communities that parents had with each other that I remember very early on, we shared with each other that we actually wanted Trusted to be one of those apps where you don't measure the time in app, right? We wanted you to spend as little time on this app as possible. You come in, you use it, you book your caregiver, and you move on. And then, of course, during the course of the booking, we provided some niceties. You can keep in touch with your caregiver, you can geolocate her, you can see a video stream, etc. But we don't want this to be an app where we spend a lot of time. Now, for caregivers, we wanted them to know that they weren't alone, that we were with them. And so we built a community around them, for them. The very first, and again, there was a lot of folks who, I remember a very early employee from Lyft actually advised us not to do this. But we felt like we needed to give them this outlet to be able to share this information with each other. We actually created a Slack group for them. That was our very first community offering for our caregivers. And they just kind of chatted with each other. They had questions and concerns. And then eventually, I think that Slack group sort of took its course, and we sort of checked out of it. But, and I think now there might be a Facebook group of these folks, but we've actually never tried to, force anything here, especially not on the parent side, because we didn't feel like that was necessary. Now, that being said, there was and there still are plans in the product to give folks a way to sort of communicate with each other and have questions, by the way, I know you work with Jessica, tell me more. And if we can create that social proof, that could be, enable social proof for a platform, that could be something else. And of course, that leads to many other things that the marketplace can offer. So there were plans for it, just never, it was one of those things that I wouldn't say we kicked it down the road, but it was never a core tenet of the product. Community or social was never a core tenet. Got
it. Yeah, that's it's probably one of the topics that comes up the most frequently in the group right now. So
yeah.
Cool. Hey, Tomas, did you want to come on?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, good morning, Anand. Thanks again so much for taking the time to connect with us. Super helpful conversation. And yeah, some really great insights. And also congratulations.
Thank
you. As a bit of context, I started a marketplace called Simple Surf. We aggregate a growing community quiver of shared surfboards and place them in secure private lockers on unused beachside property space. And a couple of questions that I had were really kind of starting from the end and looking back of your journey. One is, did you have care.com, on your radar as a potential acquirer from the beginning of your journey? And then the second is, in that transition point when you're going from, running the business as a private company versus running the business as an acquired company, what do you know now that you'd wish you'd known at the beginning of that transition?
Yeah, I thought about things that way. We had the only biggest aspiration that Viv and I had was that we can try to get this to as much scale as possible. We wanted as many users, as many parents out there to be delighted by our product, and that's what would help us sleep well at night. That was our goal. And of course, I'd say that again. I keep talking about the demand side, but on the supply side, honestly, the biggest thing we tracked was how much money they were making, right? So all our dashboards, actually, when you'd walk into our office, sort of vague concept, right? An actual in-person office. But you'd walk in, we'd have this screen, and on the screen we'd show you how much money caregivers are making on a weekly basis, who's trending on the charts and who's made the most amount of money. And so to be able to say that, hey, we've collectively paid out tens of millions of dollars on the platform is we felt really good about that. So now back on, I'll answer your question. So we never thought about this acquisition strategy really. But we saw the synergy sort of come together that, we were building an interesting product, and care.com, being the marketplace that they are, we never felt like they would lean in this direction. But I think as their product and as their offering was evolving, they saw this as being a very interesting fit for their company. And we felt the same way. We're like, wow, we need to get from where we are with our sort of tens of thousands of users to hundreds of thousands to millions of users, and they already have that scale. So like, what a quick way to sort of like get to this from this point to this point, and make that happen very quickly. So that was very lucrative, again, for us and for them, to, from a software play, and for us from, a user play. And the second note for them was, of course, the Carrot Work piece, right? And for us, the budding sort of B2B to C component that was growing for us. Again, great synergy. We realized that Carrot Work was a largely a manual operation, and we were an entirely automated operation. So we could smoothen out their sales process and their operating efficiency very, very quickly. So that's sort of how things came together. And of course, we saw a good, fit with our product teams, right? We're like, yeah, they're a product-driven company, we're a product-driven company. We feel like we can make some history together, and that's kind of how things happened. And they happened very quickly. When the initial discussions did, the diligence took its time. So that's sort of like, high level. We never thought about it as an acquisition strategy. But if I had to share like one piece of advice, it'd be that everyone's sort of a frenemy in this market, right? Like, I mean, we were competing with Care.com out of the gate, but we never shut down conversations with them. We felt like we were both really in the trenches trying to serve the same demographic, and they won a lot of battles. We won a few. But at the end of the day, we felt like make our customers happy, and that's where the winning would really happen. And I remember Basti from Postmates a long time ago, and he's a good friend of mine, and he said, like, I think competition had come up, and he was talking about DoorDash or something, and he's like, I don't ever worry about the competition, right? And that's always sort of stuck with me. And I know how big like Postmates has gotten, and I'd say I'd embodied some of that. I definitely kept our ears to the ground as far as competition goes, but I never thought about it as a strategy. I never worried about them. The biggest things that kept me at night were our users. So that's on the acquisition piece. Now, as far as like post-acquisition, things I learned, the biggest thing I'd share is that, and my wife kept me really honest about this, is that I worried about so many things that I felt like I didn't need to worry about. Like there was the negotiation and the whole like diligence process was a beast. And we had phenomenal legal teams on both sides, and I really needed to trust them with making things happen. And I was really in the trenches every step of the way, making sure that everything was checked off. And it was really tedious, and it took a lot out of me. And I wasn't kidding when I said I aged a lot in those 3 months. So if I could do one thing differently, it'd be that, the process is gonna take its course. Like it's gonna go the way it goes. And I'm not a micromanager when it comes to a lot of things, but this was so new to me that I felt like I needed to micromanage it. If I had to do one thing differently, it would be to manage the process a little bit better. I may not have answered your question about like, were you more curious about post-acquisition within the company, or were you thinking about like the actual acquisition process itself? Like, what was your question related to?
Yeah, it was mostly about the acquisition process itself, because it really feels like such a black box. It's like, this thing that's really important, but you kind of enter into it, and then like something happened, and you enter out, and something had happened. So what that was really like, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And if it ever comes down to it, any one of you, please feel free to reach out, and I could provide a great list of things not to do. But one of them is like just, and of course, since then, I've embodied so many principles, and I've read so much about how to be, how to really focus on things that you can control, and not really, keep yourself up with and worrying about things that you can't.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Some life advice there, aside from marketplace advice.
That's a great one. Cool. So we have time for one more question. Hey, Miriam, did you want to come on?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Anand. I have a couple of questions, actually. Also very curious about the acquisition. And one of my questions is just, if you're open to sharing like what the revenue or EBITDA multiple was for the acquisition, and like how you kind of you and your investors determined that was like, a good outcome. And then also how you think about kind of what to do with the next chapter of your career after having a successful exit. I know that you're working on your family and you're investing, but I'm also just curious how that kind of next chapter factored into like your decision to sell, and and what you think about kind of like spending your time on going forward, given the successful outcomes.
Yeah. I'm trying to do the math in my head on the revenue on the EBITDA multiple. I can't remember what it is. So I think sort of like segueing from the previous question, some of these things were truly a black box, and I think there were some, and I also may have to go check on our confidentiality agreements. I don't know how much of that I can share, to be honest with you, but I don't remember what the number was. Like I don't think I ever did that math, which I know sounds strange now. It maybe makes a lot of having done this a little bit more. I think it makes sense in a public setting or public company acquisition. But I don't remember what that is. I may have to look it up, and maybe I can get back to you if it doesn't violate my confidentiality agreement. In terms of determining, I'm just reading a question. So determining it was a good price. It was it was a negotiation. At the end of the day, like we went back and forth. We had the one sort of lesson that I learned is that it's always good to have interested parties in play, right? So this wasn't and I remember Naval giving me this advice, which is, it's always, and Naval was one of our investors. So it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's always good to have, I think, and I'm paraphrasing and I'm botching it because he says things so succinctly, and they hit the nail on the head very, very well. Me, not so much, but it was something like, always be prepared to walk away. Right. And I think we embodied that. And the main reason that we could do that was because there was a competitor that we were sort of engaged with other than Care.com, and who we'd worked with. We had some history with them. That was number one. And second, we were also in the market raising for our next round at that very given point in time. So we felt like we had, the acquisition wasn't the only play that we had. So again, the last footnote I'd add is that just about, and this wasn't forecast. I mean, this wasn't how we were, Viv and I weren't playing it out this way, but 2 months into the acquisition chats as they were happening, we'd actually broken even on our run rate, and we had visibility into being profitable, right? So, and that was going to happen basically in the month that our acquisition closed. So we felt like we had this suddenly, this quote unquote infinite runway, right? We had all these options now in front of us, and that gave us the ability to really work on something that made the most amount of sense for the founding team, for all the employees, for the caregivers, because they were also employees and they had to come along for this ride, for the investors, and all the shareholders were sort of part of the process. So I'd say that the price piece was important, but it wasn't the only factor that drove us in making this sort of marriage happen. It was a meeting of minds, making sure that that trust would continue to live on, that would sort of we would reach our goals of sort of getting to that next level, and so on and so forth. So for all these reasons, the acquirer, in this case was Care.com, made a ton of sense. And again, a phenomenal team, and we're super grateful for how the outcome sort of panned out. So that's on that. And again, let me go back, and Miriam, feel free to ping me offline if I can find things that I can share. I will, and as long as they don't breach our confidentiality with Care.com. As far as what comes next, I think Mike and I, he was reaching out to me, and we were chatting last year, and I was in this weird headspace of like, I just really need to focus on the family and make sure that things are sort of copacetic at home. And now that I wouldn't say things are any more stable than they were a few months ago, and I'm sure all of you empathize with that. But I feel like I'm in maybe with 2021, I feel a bit more invigorated. I feel like I'm in a different headspace. So I feel like I'm coming out of the woodworks and starting to think a little bit more about what comes next. And I definitely love marketplaces and would love to do something more in this space. But I have been in, I think as you pointed out, I have been enjoying investing and talking to entrepreneurs. And one of my mentors said this really well. I think as an investor advisor, you get to go sort of a mile deep, and a mile wide and an inch deep, across many different companies. When you're an operator, you're a mile deep and maybe an inch wide. And so I've enjoyed the process of learning and meeting new people and figuring out if, how those sort of factor into what I can do next. But whatever comes next, I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to take my time and make sure that my family's on board, and we find the right set of people to go to market with whatever comes next. But I feel like I've started that process very, very, very early now, but hopefully something happens in 2021.
Awesome. Well, that's a great way to wrap up the chat. So I was actually going to ask what's next myself. So, but this is,
Awesome.
yeah. So yeah, we're definitely running out of time. So I want to wrap it up. This is incredibly, helpful for us all here. So thanks again for taking the time to join us. So just a quick kind of plug, where can we keep up with you?
My website, Twitter. And again, I don't email me. I think is the best way if you want to get in touch. I think my thoughts are scattered and all over the place, and I don't think I have most of them tend to be about happenings in my personal life, like what my daughter is doing or things that my wife wish I do better. So if you want to follow that, I think Twitter is a great forum. But feel free to email me. It's just my first name, my last name. So it's like at my first name, last name.com. And that'd be a good way to keep in touch. Well, than that, Mike, you know how to get a hold of me if you need anything. But yeah, I'm looking forward to staying in touch. And if I can help out with any marketplaces you folks are working on, I'd love to chip in and offer my 2 cents if I can be helpful.
Awesome. Well, this is a really great chat. So thanks again for taking the time to join us, and thanks everyone for joining in.